Hello, so today for my video exam one, I'm going to be talking about utilitarianism and surrogate decision making. So, utilitarianism is an ethical theory that states that someone should act in a way that produces the most amount of happiness over unhappiness. And this is kind of the scale is kind of like happiness is equal for everyone. And it's utilitarianism is also rooted in consequentialism, and that goes to our first point, which is consequentialism. And consequentialism is the theory that consequences are like morally what it's based, like the morality of an action is based on the consequence. And the second point of utilitarianism is the hedonic calculus. The hedonic calculus kind of just like numerates or puts like a numerical value on happiness. So you can have like a happiness scale from like 0 to 100, and everybody should be able to put their happiness on a scale and put like a number. It's kind of like just quantifying happiness, which is crazy. Another main point of utilitarianism is that consequences are quantified based on the amount of happiness or unhappiness that it produces. So the consequence might be worse or better based on this, like if it's going to make you more happy or less happy. And then another topic is that trying to figure out like what in utilitarianism will make it morally right or like morally wrong, like a good versus bad decision. And that's just saying that if an action produces more happiness over unhappiness, that's a morally correct decision or it's the right thing to do, versus if it the action produces more unhappiness than happiness, that's a morally wrong thing or like the bad decision to make. Some of the objections to utilitarianism is that it doesn't account for justice or rights. So some decisions, no matter if it's an unjust decision or something that's wrong, as long as it creates happiness or over more unhappiness, and according to utilitarianism, it's a morally correct action, even if it's unjust. And another one would be the objection of personal relationships. So utilitarianism doesn't really account for like personal relationships, empathy, emotions, honesty, things like that. Like for instance, like the trolley problem, it didn't really account for any personal relationships in any of the scenarios. So utilitarianism is kind of really only rooted in happiness versus unhappiness, but in a normal society, that's not, you know, enough to make a decision just based on happiness versus unhappiness. But also some responses to these objections. The first response would be to rights and justice. It's kind of saying that if all else fails, the person's going to make a decision based on if it's going to make them happy or not. So the response is kind of saying that, yeah, something might be unjust or might not be right or might not be something that other people might see morally correct, but if it makes me happy, then technically it's a moral decision and a moral act. And if the consequence, if the consequence is going to be more like a better consequence than a worse consequence, like it's like quantifying the consequence, then it's okay no matter if it's just or unjust. And then for personal relationships, if the response was saying how like evaluating the consequences and being correct about what consequences will occur, and it's kind of saying that all values have like utilitarian basis, saying that like if, like I said before, like everything kind of falls under a happiness umbrella, and everyone's like main basis at the end of the day is like happiness over like justice, personal relationships, emotions and stuff like that. That's kind of the responses. That's kind of saying that like if anything, a person, if they had nothing else to consider, they're going to choose something that makes them happy over something that makes them unhappy, no matter what. So that's kind of a little bit about utilitarianism. So now we're going to move on to surrogate decision making. So the surrogate decision making is ethical, and why it's needed is because some patients lose capacity, so they're going to be incompetent. And if a patient's incompetent, they kind of lose the authority to make their own decisions, and they kind of don't have the independency of making their own decisions because they kind of just don't get it anymore. So surrogates are kind of needed and provided by the provider or the healthcare professional so that decisions can be made on behalf of the patient by someone that is like that knows them or is written into their living will or power of attorney. And the main point of it for like the healthcare to balance like the patient's respect for autonomy, to make sure that that's still being like implemented and considered when making medical decisions. And so there's a couple principles, Beauchamp and Childress principles, that kind of underline surrogate decision making, kind of like give providers kind of a little help on like what to do and to make sure things are still ethical, even though the patient can make their own decisions. And it's like respect for autonomy, which is saying that the patient should have independence and a say in the decisions that they want to make about medical help. The other one is beneficence, which is saying that it's an obligation for the healthcare provider to like have the patient's best interest at heart. And then non-maleficence is saying that like no harm should be done to the patient, and the provider should make sure that the patient does no harm to themselves. And those are kind of the principles that kind of root the surrogate decision making process and kind of help push that through like in the smooth and ethical process. There's also two principles that go for surrogate decision making that kind of help the surrogate and providers kind of get to know like what to do to make sure things run smoothly still. You have the authority principles and you have the guidance principles. The authority principles kind of state like whoever's chosen to be the surrogate or to be the person that makes decisions for the patient, they should be someone that knows like what they're talking about. They kind of know the patient, they know the patient's beliefs, goals, stuff like that. And then and that's usually someone that's written in the living will or someone that is named by the power of attorney. And if those people aren't met or like made, then they have to go by like a hierarchy, like a surrogate hierarchy. And so that's that. And then with guidance principle, what that is saying that kind of keeping respect for autonomy for the patient. And under that you have some directives. So the advanced directives, what they kind of do to determine how the surrogate should make decisions. There's three options. There's the instructional directive, which kind of states that it's almost like a step-by-step list of what the named surrogate should do in certain situations, and kind of what to do based on the technology that's available at the time that the surrogate was written in. The proxy advanced directive kind of states that, or kind of gives name to who the surrogate's actually going to be. And there's a hybrid option, kind of both of those. But there's also some problems with that. The proxy problem, which is kind of saying that what if the proxy that was chosen doesn't really like agree with the patient's beliefs or goals or stuff like that. So it's kind of like that might skew how the proxy kind of handles the situation. There's also a problem with the instructional method, which is kind of saying like what if there's some advancements that may have changed along the way that the now proxy doesn't know how to kind of make a decision based off of that. And there's also the substitutional judgment after the advanced directives fail and the best medical interest. Substitutional judgment is like stepping into the patient's shoes and kind of making a decision based on that. But the problem with that is like, what if we don't have the same values as the patient? You might do something that the patient might have not wanted. And then best medical interest is like putting all else like beliefs and goals aside and just making a decision based on just solely medical. But the objection to that is like it might go against the patient's respect for autonomy. You might not make the correct decision or might not do what the patient kind of wants. So that's my video exam number 1. Thank you.